about little Mia, and Ari and her husband were having a conversation about, you know, how's the bub going, and you were just moving around and getting some sort of feelings that weren't quite right. Is that right?
Yeah, it dawned on me that she wasn't moving.
Right.
So we kind of thought, you know, at some point, because I mean, babies, they sleep and
they do,
you know, all that sort of stuff. So said it as well. So, but unfortunately they can't say right then and there. They're like, well, I'm only the midwife. We need to wait for the doctor. And so then the doctor does that. She does the same thing.
Right.
Well, we have to send you down to the radiographer first because we have to have an ultrasound to confirm. So you literally...
And they didn't say?
Well, they didn't, but
they kind of indicated.
At that point, she said, I can confirm that there isn't a heartbeat. And
yes.
At that point, both my husband and I broke down because we knew. I mean, I'd been crying the whole time because I knew. And then when we had the ultrasound, the radiographer said, do you want the screen on or off? And I said, look, I'm actually happy to have it on. Well, it was going to be on, but, you know, do you want to be able to see it or not? So, so then we confirmed that she had actually passed. And so then comes and you don't think of these things, but then of course comes the challenge of, well, you have to give birth to her.
Yes.
So that was the conversation, because I was like, so what happens next? You know, through my immediate grief, what happens next? And that was the answer, is you have to give birth to her. So I rang my mum, because I needed her to come. I told her what had happened, and I needed her to come and look after the kids as well. And we started the process. They gave us lots of options, but in my mind at the time, which was racing, was that, well, we just need to do the next step and the next step and the next step. And I think a big part of that was because I needed to do the next step.
Yeah.
So we started being induced.
Right.
My throat's catching up.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Just take the time.
Yes, we started being induced, or I was that night. And the next morning, the Monday morning on the 9th, I rang my best friend who's in Hobart, and she said, oh, is everything okay? What's going on? And I burst into tears and told her what had happened, and she burst into tears as well. And it just happened to be Regatta Day, which is a public holiday only in Hobart.
Yeah.
And so it just happened that her husband had the day off, and it just happened that she could literally just jump in the car. She had 4 children. She has 4 children of her own. And jumped in the car and drove. And I always joke with her, you know, I don't know how she found time to do it, that she managed to somehow get in record speed from Hobart to Launceston and get a card and sign it and buy a whole heap of snacks and things ready for my children and to kind of and feed everyone that was there. So she came and along with my husband, she held my hand through the being induced, which continued for the rest of the day until late after 9 o'clock that night, when I actually gave birth to Mia.
And I'm not even going to ask you. Whew. This is very emotional, and I'm sure there are other people that have been through the same thing as you. But can you share, after all that happened to you, what was the moment where you could actually pick yourself up and keep going? How long did it take you to really work your way through the sadness, the emptiness, and all those feelings. How long did it take you to do that? I know now it still hurts.
Yes.
But you know, you've moved on.
Yes.
She will always be a part of your life.
Yes.
And she was your running buddy.
Yeah.
And she will always
She
be.
still is in many ways.
Yeah.
So it's a very hard moment to pinpoint, and I don't know. I mean, grief is such a complicated emotion and experience.
Yes.
For me, there was a certain, I don't know. It was so hard to articulate, even really the grief that I felt, and
still do to this day.
Still to this day.
Yep.
So we came home from the hospital, and there was, because funeral arrangements and things like that, which we didn't end up having a funeral, but just even all of those sorts of things that are so hard. And I remember my husband describing going and picking up her ashes from the funeral parlour and describing his grief to me, because I was not able to do it. I could not go.
Yeah.
And him saying, I was crossing the street and I just felt so sad. But I was bringing my baby home. So I held my head high as I crossed the street. So it's a challenge. It's challenging for everyone. I think that's the thing as well, is that we sometimes don't consider, or it's easy to overlook the fact that there are other grieving parties. And
absolutely,
my husband lost a child as well.
Yeah.
And my children had to go through that experience as well. And
what was it like for them? Can you?
Yeah. So initially, we were asked about whether we would, we would bring our children in.
Yeah.
When I was being induced, the children did come in and see us, and my son, who, and I can't even think how old he would have been at the time, but it must have been about 4. So it was kind of just, he understood that there was something wrong with the baby, but he didn't quite understand. My daughter, who was 6 at the time, immediately devastation.
Yeah.
She was in so much grief, which is heartbreaking as well, to see your child grieve like that. And initially, the thought of allowing my children to see Mia after she was born, I couldn't wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
After she was born, it actually felt like maybe that was a good thing to do. So my children did actually come and meet her, and hold her, and which and like I said, I mean, initially I just thought, as if I couldn't possibly do that. It was so, I was so dead against it, and then it completely flipped on that. So I think that's a very personal choice. And
yes.
With how you want to do that, and so there was a really quite an intense period there in the immediate weeks following.
Yes.
And I was through my creatrix, I was supported with that as well, but I wasn't ready to let go of grief, which is something I did ultimately creatrix. But at the time, I was like, I actually want to hold on to my grief right now.
You need to hold on to it until you're ready to let it go.
Yeah, so I held on to my grief, and it was like cradling it.
Yes.
And in a way, it was sort of, what it was holding on to the idea of Mia. Yes. And processing the fact that future that we had planned, that wasn't going to eventuate, that was gone. And it's a very confronting feeling when something happens and it's so wrong and you don't want it to be the case, and yet you are deeply aware that you actually can't, you're powerless to change how it is.
Did you ever go into denial?
No.
You were just facing it?
Yeah. I attribute that, though, I do attribute that to the fact that having gone through that process of my own emotional clearing,
yes,
that I was able to confront it more, because having experienced so much anxiety and depression previous to that, and so easily triggered into depression and suicidal depression, where I really, you know, didn't want to live my life anymore. I knew that, you know, if anything was going to trigger me into that something like this really was a risk, but because I had that release, it was about a capacity to confront it.
Yes.
So
you had that.
Yeah.
You felt you had that strength.
Absolutely, it was absolutely a strength of an emotional strength and resilience to be able to confront, deal with, move through, and come out the other side of. And
this is you doing that. But
yes.
Also, you had your children.
Yes, where I had to support them, and my husband.
And your husband as well. So it wasn't just one thing, it was several things all combined together. Yeah. You had that strength to be able to deal with all facets there.
Yes.
When you came from, prior to having Mia or even being pregnant with Mia, you know, suffering from depression as you were growing up and suicidal and all the rest of it, then you did some work on those things for yourself personally.
Yes.
Before you fell pregnant with Mia, which then gave you that I'm not sure what I really want to say, that strength that you could face.
It was the same strength that had made me decide that I was ready to change the entire direction of my career and life.
Right.
Was that strength, and I thought that that's what Creatrix was to give me, was that strength.
It was
what I didn't
be,
realise that the strength that Creatrix gave me was actually the strength to deal with the devastation that came with losing Mia.
Yeah. And from there till now, when you think of Mia, what's that feeling for you? I mean, the devastation wouldn't be quite so bad, but it's always there in your heart, isn't it?
Yeah, for me now, I mean, so in that time, so we lost Mia in 2015.
Yes.
And then in May 2016, I gave birth to my son. So that was it was a challenging pregnancy.
I was going to say, how were you feeling in that?
Yeah, I mean, it was very confronting, and we had a few scares, but I think they were scares mainly because we were just on high alert.
Yes.
And so, yeah, in the end, you know, obviously everything was fine, but those first few weeks, you know, you're overtired and you've got a newborn, and it's a challenging emotional time anyway, and I think it was in those weeks that I really felt there was a lot of sadness, and I think that's the strength that I have from that, is that emotions used to overwhelm me.
Yes.
To the point of swamping me, whereas this now is more like a gentle lapping of the sides kind of thing, and so, you know, it was those late hours, the wee hours of the morning where I'd be nursing Bryn, and it was those moments where you get a little wash of sadness of what should have been, what could have been.
Been, yeah.
So that and you know, to this day there are times where I watch him running around, or, you know, and there are those moments where you do have those thoughts of, you know, what ifs.
Yeah.
But they're more just sort of sad moments that come and go.
But you're allowed to have those.
Absolutely, and they're
memories.
They pass through. You know, you watch them come, you hold them for that moment, and then they kind of disintegrate in your hands the moment you sort of almost hold them in your hand, they disappear as you acknowledge them. They go again. It's a very kind of thin, you know, ethereal thing.
So you actually had the privilege of holding her.
Yeah, I still have. held her on my chest after she was born, and it was one of the most painful moments, actually, out of all of them. I was on a lot of morphine. I had natural births. All of my births had been, save for a bit of gas, which never seemed to really work for me, had been natural, drug-free or relatively drug-free births. And I remember being in agony, emotional agony around whether or not to... I felt that there was a moment where I thought I might be dishonouring her by taking drugs for that birth. But
you needed to do
I
that.
Needed to at that time. And so
for
I was on a lot of morphine.
But for your health and well-being...
Yes.
It was necessary for you to do that.
I was in so much grief and pain emotionally at the time that I don't know whether I would have been able to... I mean, anyone who's had a baby has that moment in labour where they... I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether I would have made it through that moment without it. So I was a little bit out of it, but I held her on my chest, and I remember a very painful moment of... You know, you see those, and in fact it came around on Facebook within weeks of me coming out of the hospital. There's a video where it's like the baby that had nearly died, and they put them on mum's chest, and, sure enough, they stirred into life, and now a healthy baby, and I held her on my chest, and I just willed her to come back to me, but knew at the same time
it wasn't going to happen.
That was never going to happen.
Mm.
So that was a very painful moment.
Yeah. But now, when you think of her, can you think of her as your running buddy, the person that inspired you to change your life and was there for you, regardless of whether she is now or not, that she was there for a purpose in your life?
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, I'm always a bit loath to say that, everything happens in your life for a reason, because I think that can sometimes be twisted into a sort of an act of shaming people. And having spoken of shame before, I'm a bit cautious about it. But I think definitely every experience has a lesson that you can take from it.
Yeah.
And so for me, look, the strength that... She gave me the awareness of the strength that I had developed.
Yeah.
And you never know the depths of your strength until you are tested.
Absolutely.
And boy, was I tested.
You were tested. Yeah.
So I definitely realised the strength that I had.
And have now.
Yeah. And it also made me realise that, having gone through so much in my own life and having been challenged so much emotionally and in dealing with, and for what was such a long time, an inability to deal with stress and the challenges of life.
Yes.
It made me realise that, that's her legacy, is wanting to be able to help women develop and tap into their strength,
their inner strength,
so that they can deal with the challenges that life throws at them.
Absolutely.
That could be anything from just having a rough day to the
challenge that you had. Yeah.
So that's definitely her legacy, and what I've certainly, the lesson I've taken from it is I have a strength within me that
you didn't realise
I had, even after having. I mean, I think it was something that came from clearing all of the emotional crap that I had going on.
Yeah.
But I never realised just how cleared I had been until I was then tested in that way. And then to then sort of go, well, okay, what can... Because the thought that I had was, I have to make this mean something.
Yes.
This has to mean something, because what's it all worth? It can't be this painful and not have any outcome.
Yeah.
So that was my outcome, was then to go on to train as a creatrix facilitator myself.
Yes.
And I actually have to thank the people around me at the time. There were lots of people around me that helped contribute to a fund to help me pay so that I could go off and train as a creatrix facilitator, so that I could then help break other women through,
and
so that
bring
they
out
could have
their
their
inner strength. Yeah.
And so that was the legacy. And coincidentally, the course, which I had initially thought I would never be able to attend because I was due to give birth to Mia in that middle of that week.
Yeah.
And instead, in the middle of that week, I'd had a moment of grieving for her, and then I cleared grief.
Yeah.
And that was that.
Oof.
That
is a beautiful story. It's a sad story, but it brings to the fore the strength that we as women have within us that we never know that we have until something happens. And thank you for sharing that.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you. We're going for a break.
Sure.